I dumped my fiancée for being homophobic to my bi brother. Now she's crying about ruining her life but still won't apologize. I'm in a tough spot at the moment. My fiancée, let's call her Karen, 32, and me, 31, were about to get married in a bit more than 6 months. Everything started to go bad when we started to talk about the guest list. Karen had been saying for a while she didn't want my little brother, let's go with Chad, 26, for a while, but she wouldn't give me a real explanation. I've told her many times my brother's presence was absolutely not negotiable though. For some background, Chad and me have always been super close. Our parents weren't abusing or anything, but they weren't really the serious kind of parents. They would often drop us at grandma's to go party, and as soon as I was old enough to take care of us both, they just let the house and the bro for me to handle. This is a trash way to treat your kids, sure, but at least it allowed us to bond super close. I'm not exaggerating when I say he is my favorite person in the whole world. I would take a bullet for him, and I think the only people who could brag about being as loved as I love him are my future kids. So yeah, my baby brother's presence at my wedding is not something I am willing to sacrifice at all. I remember when we first started living basically on our own. I was 18 and Chad was 13. Our parents would leave money for groceries and bills, but everything else was up to me. I learned to cook proper meals, well, as proper as a teenager could manage, helped Chad with his homework, and made sure he got to school on time. We had this routine where we'd make breakfast together every morning. Chad would be in charge of the toast while I handled the eggs. Even now, whenever he visits, we still do that same breakfast routine. It's our thing. Karen and I met at a tech company here in Seattle 4 years ago. She worked in marketing, I was in software development. We hit it off during one of those mandatory team building events, you know, the kind where they make you do trust falls and solve ridiculous puzzles together. She seemed perfect then. Smart, ambitious, came from a good family, as she always liked to point out. Her parents, the Andersons, lived in this fancy house in Bellevue and always made subtle comments about how they were old money. Should have seen the red flags there, I guess. Chad actually helped me pick out Karen's engagement ring last year. We spent an entire Saturday going from jeweler to jeweler until we found the perfect one. He was so excited about having a sister-in-law, kept talking about how our family was growing. The irony of that now just makes my blood boil. Now, a few days ago, the topic of the guests came back on the table and Karen said one more time that she doesn't want Chad there. I was really getting pissed at that point and told her there wouldn't be a wedding at all if he isn't there, so she better either drop it or leave. Then I asked her why the hell doesn't she want him there in the first place. So that bitch tells me she doesn't want a faggot on her wedding day and that her family doesn't approve of this lifestyle. The moment those words left her mouth, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The Karen the first thought I knew disappeared in that instant, replaced by someone I didn't recognize at all. The worst part was how casual she said it, like she was commenting on the weather. I remembered all the times Chad had been over for dinner, how he'd helped her pick out curtains for our apartment, how he brought her soup when she had the flu last winter. All while she was harboring this hatred for who he was. The wedding planning had been going on for months. We'd already put down deposits on this beautiful venue overlooking Puget Sound, hired a band that specialized in both modern hits and jazz standards, Chad's suggestion, he's always had great taste in music, and sent out save the dates to over 200 guests. Karen's parents had insisted on this big, elaborate affair to maintain their social standing. Mr. Anderson had even bragged about flying in some renowned chef from New York for the catering. I was like, did she really just say that? I knew she wasn't exactly the progressive type, but it never got that far. Like my brother is the sweetest, kindest, purest soul on earth, I couldn't believe she would hate him so much for something so trivial. And yeah, Chad is bi. He came out to me when he was 20 and he looked so damn scared. I told him I loved him no matter what OFC, and I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone else make him feel that scared or hurt ever again. That coming out moment is forever etched in my memory. It was a rainy Seattle evening, typical, and Chad had asked if we could talk. We were sitting in my old apartment, the one with the squeaky floorboards and the temperamental heating. He'd barely touched the pizza we'd ordered, which was my first clue something was up. Chad never passes up pizza. When he finally told me, his hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold his coffee mug. Seeing my usually confident, easygoing brother so terrified broke my heart. We ended up talking until 3 a.m. that night, and I made sure he knew nothing could ever change how much I loved him. And I couldn't even imagine that woman in the same room as him after what she just said. I'd protective big bro instincts kicked in and I told her we're fucking done. I asked her back the ring, that she reluctantly gave back, before telling her she had 10 minutes to pack her things and get TF out of my house before I call the cops. She tried to backtrack, saying she didn't mean it that way and that I was overreacting. But there's no other way to mean that word. While she was packing, she kept bringing up all these memories, Our first date at that Ethiopian restaurant where we both pretended to know how to eat with injera bread, the time we got lost hiking Mount Rainier and ended up having to camp overnight with completely inadequate gear, the weekend we spent assembling IKEA furniture for our apartment and somehow ended up with 3 extra screws from the bedroom set that we never figured out where they belonged. But those memories meant nothing now. They were tainted by the knowledge of who she really was. As she frantically stuffed clothes into her designer suitcase, a Christmas gift from her parents, I took down all our photos from the walls. Each one felt like a lie now. There was one of all of us at last year's Thanksgiving. Chad had made his famous pumpkin cheesecake, and Karen had raved about it. Now I wondered if she'd been secretly disgusted just being at the same table as him. Obviously I canceled everything and told everyone who would ask the exact reason why Karen and I are done. The venue coordinator, Sarah, was actually incredibly understanding. She said they'd make an exception to their cancellation policy given the circumstances and refund most of our deposit. The band was similarly sympathetic. Their lead singer mentioned having a gay son and said she wouldn't have wanted to play for someone like that anyway. The calls and messages started pouring in almost immediately. Our friends from work were particularly shocked. Karen had always presented herself as this progressive, open-minded person in the office. She'd even attended the company's diversity and inclusion workshops and once organized a fundraiser for an LGBTQ+ youth center. The irony of that still makes me want to scream. Sweet Chad heard of it and saw the proportion this drama was gaining. He even told me it's not a big deal if he's not there, he just wants me to be happy. I told him my big day is meant to be the happiest in my life and it wouldn't fucking be without him. And I certainly can't be happy with someone like Karen given who she really is. The next day, Chad showed up at my place with a 6-pack of my favorite local IPA and Chinese takeout from that hole-in-the-wall place we've been going to since college. He looked so guilty, like somehow this was his fault. We ended up spending the whole evening on my couch, watching those terrible sci-fi movies we used to love as kids. At one point he tried again to say maybe he could just skip the ceremony and come to the reception, and I nearly threw a fortune cookie at his head. I reminded him how he was there for me through everything. When I bombed my first coding interview, when I got food poisoning from that sketchy food truck and spent 2 days hugging the toilet, when our parents missed my college graduation because they were on some cruise in the Caribbean. Well, now she is back to her parents' house, and some of our mutual friends have really distanced themselves from her. The fallout at work has been interesting, to say the least. Karen tried to come into the office like nothing happened, but word had spread fast. People who used to stop by her desk for coffee chats suddenly had urgent meetings to attend. The rainbow flag sticker on her laptop, which I now realize was probably just for show, mysteriously disappeared. Our friend group has basically split in two. Most sided with me and Chad, especially after hearing exactly what Karen said. But a few, mainly those who also came from old money backgrounds like Karen, tried to defend her. James, who I thought was one of my closest friends, actually had the nerve to suggest I was throwing away a good thing over political correctness. Needless to say, he's not someone I talk to anymore. I've got a lot of texts from her family, all more hateful than the previous one, and ended up blocking them all. The Andersons have shown their true colors in spectacular fashion. Mrs. Anderson sent me a 5-paragraph email about how I've ruined their daughter's prospects and brought shame to their family name. Mr. Anderson apparently tried to call my company's HR department to complain about me. Thankfully, my manager laughed it off. Even Karen's brother, Michael, who I used to play golf with sometimes, sent me a series of increasingly unhinged messages about family values and moral decay. The most ridiculous was probably Karen's Aunt Susan, who I'd met maybe twice, leaving a rambling voicemail about how her psychic had predicted this would happen because Mercury was in retrograde when Karen and I first met. At least that one gave Chad and me something to laugh about. Karen, on the other hand, hasn't been really aggressive or anything, just alternating between guilt-tripping and cries, saying how I ruined her life. News spread like wildfire apparently, and that she can't believe I ruined our 4 years relationship over a word. But not once she has apologized for what she told about Chad, so I know even more I don't want to do anything to do with her anymore. She's tried different approaches to get me back. First, it was the tearful phone calls at 2 a.m., talking about all our plans, the house we were going to buy in Queen Anne, the kids we'd talked about having, the golden retriever we'd already picked out a name for. Then she switched to sending long emails about how she's willing to learn and grow and how she comes from a different background. The latest attempt was having her colleague Emma, who I always suspected had a crush on me, reach out to check how I'm doing and casually mention how sorry Karen is. Last week, I ran into Karen's mom at the grocery store. I tried to duck into the cereal aisle to avoid her, but she cornered me by the organic quinoa. She started going on about how Karen was raised with certain values and how I should try to understand their perspective. I just smiled, told her I hope they all get the help they need, and walked away. Chad nearly fell off his chair laughing when I told him about it later. The support from unexpected places has been amazing though. My team at work surprised me by decorating my desk with pride flags one morning. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who used to complain about everything, brought over a homemade apple pie and told me she was proud of me for standing up for what's right. Even our parents, who are usually pretty checked out, called to say they were happy I'd grown up to be a good man. So yeah, maybe I'm the but I don't think so, and honestly I think she deserves every part of the backlash she is getting. She has to face the consequences of her hatred, and it's great her true self has been revealed to the world emo. Who even says that in Seattle anyway lol. Chad and I have started a new tradition of non-wedding Wednesday. Every week we try a new restaurant or activity that we would have been too busy for if I was still planning the wedding. Last week we went to this amazing Korean barbecue place, and next week we're thinking of trying rock climbing. He's also convinced me to finally adopt a cat from the local shelter, something Karen was always against because she didn't want pet hair on her designer clothes. The ring is still sitting in my dresser drawer. I thought about selling it, but honestly, I might just donate it to that LGBTQ+ youth center Karen once supported. Seems like poetic justice, doesn't it? Chad thinks it's hilarious and has already offered to help me write the donation letter. Looking back, there were probably signs I missed. The way Karen would tense up when my brother brought dates to family dinners, regardless of their gender. How she'd change the subject whenever Chad talked about his volunteer work at the LGBTQ+ community center. The subtle way she'd exclude him from certain conversations or events. I guess love really does make you blind sometimes. But you know what? I'm actually grateful it all came out before the wedding. Better to lose a 4-year relationship than spend a lifetime with someone who could harbor such hatred toward my brother, or anyone else for that matter. Chad keeps telling me I didn't have to blow up my whole life for him, but he's wrong. Some things are worth blowing up your life for, and standing up for the people you love is definitely one of them. Yesterday, I finally finished taking down all the wedding planning stuff that was pinned to my bulletin board, venue details, color schemes, seating charts, all that stuff. Found myself smiling as I threw it all in the recycling bin. Chad was right there with me, making unnecessarily dramatic throwing motions and humming the funeral march. We ended the evening playing video games and ordering way too much pizza, just like we used to do when we were kids. The funny thing is, I don't even feel sad anymore. Angry sometimes, sure, especially when I think about how Karen and her family could judge someone as genuine and kind as Chad. But mostly I feel relieved. Relieved that I found out who Karen really was before it was too late. Relieved that I didn't compromise on what matters most. Relieved that I can look my brother in the eye and know I had his back when it counted. And hey, who knows? Maybe someday I'll meet someone who loves Chad as much as I do, who understands that he's not just my brother but my best friend, my family, and one of the best people I know. Until then, I've got my brother, my friends, my job, and apparently now a cat. Chad's already picked one out, an orange tabby with one eye that he says is character. So yeah, that's where things stand now. Karen's still trying to do damage control in her social circles, her family's still sending the occasional hostile message, though they're getting creative with new email addresses since I've blocked them all, and I'm still getting asked to tell this story at least once a day at work. But you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. Because at the end of the day, I might have lost a fiancé, but I kept my integrity, my self-respect, and most importantly, my brother's trust. And that's worth more than any wedding could ever be. Life's funny like that sometimes. You think you know someone, you make all these plans, and then one sentence changes everything. But sometimes, like in this case, that change turns out to be exactly what you needed. Who would have thought that the worst thing Karen ever said would end up being the best thing that could have happened to me?